And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hello there. I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan, and this is your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Monday, November 17th, 2025. We start out with the sea ice. The ice is extensive now along the Beaufort Sea coast. It's filled in, and we see the ice expanding here through the Chukchi Sea and along the Chukchi Sea coastline and Norton Sound. The ice is growing there as well, and that will continue to be the case. We do have an area of low pressure, a rather compact, windy one that's going to be lifting northward up along the west side of the Seward Peninsula, Bering Strait, as we head through later Wednesday. And as a result, there will be snow and blowing snow. We have winter storm warnings covering much of the Seward Peninsula, including St. Lawrence Island, as well as winter weather advisories for Kivalina down along Kotzebue Sound, as well as Norton Sound. Snowfall amounts, many areas there along like Kotzebue and Norton Sounds, 2 to 5 inches, gusts to 40, near 50 miles an hour, could create near blizzard conditions at times. The snow will be heavier across St. Lawrence Island and portions of the Seward Peninsula. Nome could see as much as 8 to 12 inches of snow with some considerable blowing and drifting at times. But looking at the weather map later tonight, we find that area of low pressure riding up along the eastern Bering between St. Lawrence Island, Norton Sound, and the lower Yukon coast off of Imanik. And this low will just gradually drift northward as we head through Tuesday and into Wednesday. As we go into Tuesday, the next frontal system will be coming up here out of the North Pacific and bring stronger winds to the Panhandle on Wednesday. So get ready for some gale force winds with even lower end storm force gust as this front pulls northward during the day, late Tuesday night, especially Wednesday morning, early afternoon. Meanwhile, we have some other energy, a couple of lows crossing the Bering and along the Aleutian chain as we go through Tuesday afternoon. This is going to link up with another low coming up out of the North Pacific and become a stronger, very broad circulation along Bristol Bay by Thursday. So that'll be the next significant system, in addition to one coming out of the North Pacific into the Gulf for the midweek period. So we have more active weather on the way by Wednesday afternoon. Here's the low coming up from the North Pacific into the Gulf with the front wrapping around it, and that's what's going to cause those strong winds, especially along the outer coast of the Panhandle. And then as we look westward, the low that right now is coming up along the west coast is going to be up into the Chukchi Sea, and then that energy that was coming out of the along the Aleutian chain is going to link up with yet another low coming out of the North Pacific, and this system is going to deepen and become a strong low over Bristol Bay on Thursday. So again, stay tuned to later forecasts for that. But in the meantime, southeast winds 15 to 20 knots on Tuesday for the inner channels. Waves generally a couple of feet, though outside here of Ketchikan, Metlakatla, and Dixon Entrance, they could be 6-8 feet. The outer coast will see south-southeast winds 15 to 20 knots, waves 10 to generally 11 feet there for Tuesday. But look at the winds really increase with that next front as it comes up from the south. For the inner channels, Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage, north winds 15 to 20 knots, waves 3 to 4 feet. Southeast gales to 35 knots into Ketchikan, Metlakatla, with waves 10 to 12 feet there in Dixon Entrance. For the outer coast here, for the nearshore waters, strong easterly gales, 40-45 knots with gusts to 60 knots here off of Prince of Wales Island. So again, we find waves building upwards around or just over 20 feet as you get offshore from the immediate coastline. Further north, northeast to north winds out of Yakutat and on over to Cape Suckling with 14 to 15 foot waves. Tuesday, Prince William Sound, southeast winds 15 knots, waves a few feet. Cook Inlet, north-northeast winds 10 knots, upper middle Cook Inlet, southeast 15 knots with 2-3 foot waves there in lower Cook Inlet on Tuesday. Then Wednesday, northeast winds of 10 knots within Prince William Sound with waves a couple of feet there. Outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance along the eastern Kenai, northeast winds to 20 knots, waves 5-6 feet. And then coming down the length of Cook Inlet, northeast winds 15, but 20 knots here once we get toward the middle inlet off of Anchor Point, waves 5 feet. East winds to 25 knots for lower Cook Inlet and around the Barren Islands and Kennedy Entrance with 5 foot waves. For Kodiak Island on Tuesday, southwest winds 15 knots, waves 3 feet, Shelikof Strait 6-8 feet off of Kodiak Island, then southwest winds 20 knots on the North Pacific side, waves 6 to 8 feet, and then for the Bering side, south winds of 20 to 25 knots with waves 6 feet there within the wider expanse of Bristol Bay to 9 feet off of Cold Bay. And then on Wednesday, east winds 20 to 25 knots in the vicinity of Kodiak Island with waves around 5 feet. Look for southeast to south winds, strongest up here 30 to 35 knots, especially east of Chiknik, where waves may build 11 to 14 feet on the North Pacific side, 7 to 9 feet on the Bering side. The Aleutians on Tuesday, we'll see south-southwest winds 25 to 30 knots around Unalaska, but as we go westward, 35 to 40 knot gales associated with this front that pulls back to a low center out toward the western Aleutians, and pretty much 35 to 40 knot gales the central through western Aleutians. For Wednesday, those winds will come down and we find winds south-southwest 25-30 knots, eastern central Aleutians, they'll veer more westerly. Once you get toward Adak westward, look for northwest winds around 30 knots on Wednesday. And then for the southwest coast, south winds to 30 knots into Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays, and we find winds along the lower Yukon coast into that wider expanse of Norton Sound between Imanik and Nome. Southwest to south, 25 to 30 knots, waves where there is not ice, 6-7 feet. Out towards St. Matthew, north winds of 30 knots and 15-foot waves. For Wednesday, we have low pressure energy that's going to be drifting northward. And so again, you're going to have snow, blowing snow in these areas of the Yukon coastline up into Norton Sound, Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island. Look for east-southeast winds 30 knots with falling snow and blowing snow, reducing visibility. 35-knot southeast winds there in Bristol Bay and Kuskokwim Bay with waves 7-8 feet. And then those winds turn north and then westerly from St. Matthew down through the Pribilovs at 30 to 35 knots with 15 to 16-foot waves. As we go further north on Tuesday, west side of the Seward Peninsula, Wales to Nome, and then the north side of St. Lawrence Island, northeast to north, gales of 35 to 40 knots. Waves could be as high as 12-14 feet along the north side there of St. Lawrence Island, along with snow and blowing snow. As we come up along the lower Chukchi Sea, winds will go from northerly back to easterly south of Cape Hope at 30 knots with waves where there is any open water, 6-7 feet. And then as we come up along the Chukchi Sea coast, there's ice continuing to build there all the way up through Utqiagvik. And then we have the ice located along the Beaufort Sea coast with winds easterly falling off to 10 to 15 knots, Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik. On Wednesday, winds in the far north along the Beaufort Sea will be southeast to south, 10 to 15 knots, increasing southeast winds to 20 knots, Utqiagvik down through Point Lay, and then the winds turn more southerly off of Cape Lisburne and Point Hope, 20-25 knots, with an easterly 25-knot wind out of Kotzebue Sound. And as we pass through the Bering Strait between Wales and Nome, we're looking at easterly winds of 25 knots with 4 to 5 foot waves where there is open water. And then on the north side of St. Lawrence Island for Wednesday, we're looking for northeasterly winds of 30 knots with 6 to 7 foot waves. And keep in mind, there will be areas of snow and blowing snow within this region as a result of that low pressure lifting northward on Wednesday.